Hey guys, Stealth here. In this deck review I'm looking at a USSR deck that's designed specifically for low point tactical gameplay. It's a general deck, and that's the first thing that I might change if I were to use this deck in an actual low point tactical game. A general deck does not gain any kind of XP boosts to the units, so you don't have a higher veterancy. If you've never played a low point tactical game, by the way, it's a game where you don't have a lot of starting points and you don't get a lot of income. So the units that you bring in are going to have to make the difference. That means that you will be using lower veterancy units, which are usually of higher quality, because they carry a higher price tag. You have more time to micromanage the units, and with that you can, for example, bring in a super heavy and have it survive the entire game if you play it right. So this deck was sent in by Lagmaster, and I'm going to design it for low point tactical games such as 1v1, 2v2, 3v3 and 4v4, as he described it in the description of the deck. Now, as mentioned, I would personally go for specialization because that's going to give you even more bang for your buck. But if you're doing a 1v1, a specialized deck might not be the way to go. I think that those decks really start to come into their own when you're doing a 3v3, for example, where every player has their own role. Anyway, supply-wise, logistics-wise, it's pretty much standard. You got a FOB, you got a couple of Ural trucks, you got an MI6, and then he has a BMD 2K. 130 point unit. They are slightly expensive for a low point tactical. But you don't really get any good alternatives which carry a lower price tag yet still have some armor. The one that you could consider is the BRDM-2U, because it still carries the same amount of armor. It does not get the main gun, but you don't really want a CV to have a main gun because it's going to give itself away. So that is one change that I would be making here. Whoops, that's the wrong one. This one, BRDM-2U. Saves you 10 points, and in a low point tactical game even 10 points can be interesting. Infantry wise, he has a lot of VDV, and he has these in the BMD-3 at lower veterancy, so 13. I more or less agree with this because you do want to have a decent amount of infantry, but you want to also have them at the best possible efficiency. And that's when you need to get them at veteran. Also, the BMD-3 at veteran becomes an even more lethal unit. So what I'm going to do here is upvet these guys. The other VDVs that he has are brought in Mi-8 TVs, which carry those 57mm rocket pods. Let's see, an MTV might be better. The reason I'm saying that is because you get rocket pods which have more HE damage. This is 4 HE damage versus 1. They carry a very small amount of them, only 20, but for a 30 point helicopter I would pick this one because it's going to be more effective. So let's delete these and get a couple of VDVs in, and I guess I'm going with 9 instead of 13 because I want to get those guys at maximum veterancy. And not only the VDV but also the Mi-8 MTV. So with this you get a sort of poor man's gunship, and you can see the rocket pods here mounted on the sides of the helicopter. These things can be remarkably annoying if you're coming up against them, because they will damage and or destroy your transports and possibly even do damage to the infantry that's inside. Also, they carry one frontal and one side armor, and that means that they are actually pretty survivable. They can take some hits from a spark before they have to retreat. Next up, Igla Ns. And these guys are, of course, the AA units. He does have a high amount of them, though. This is really a question of, do I need more units, or am I really going to be sufficient with 4 AA units? Before I'm going to answer that question, I'm first going to look in support, see what he has there. Spear users, Tungushkas and Bucks. In that situation, I don't think you're going to be needing that many Igla Ns. So I'm going to upvet these guys as well to make them even more accurate and even more deadly. They're brought in by the Skrajat, which is also a sort of semi-AA unit, although you can also use it versus infantry. The problem is that it's not that it's not that accurate, and the main gun, if you're using it versus ground targets, is not that good because it only has a 1000 meter range. It does, however, have a high rate of fire, and with that you can stun enemy infantry pretty quickly. Now, concours in another Scrajat. These concours are the concours M. He has 7 of these. Let's see, he has quite a few units in tanks, some vehicles, some helis. I don't think that we're going to be needing these by the high numbers. I'd prefer to take them at hardened. Again, get a little bit fewer but more accuracy. And with a 23 armor penetration, you should be able to penetrate almost any target and still do some damage. I'm considering bringing him in another vehicle, because while the Scrajets are useful, we already have those with the Igla Ends. And the Concours M are expensive enough as is. They're already 25 point units, so I'm going to make these guys as cheap as possible and transport them in an empty LBV. And then finally there's Spatsnaz in here. This again is a matter of personal preference. If you want to have these Spatsnaz, for example, as door kickers for an urban map, you can use them in a very cheap transport. If you want these to come in from an unexpected angle, or if you want to get a pretty cheap gunship which can still do some damage in the form of the Mi-24D, go with the expensive Spatsnaz for 35 points and 55 for the helicopter. Personally, I would go with a cheap transport. So instead of bringing in one of these with a hind for 90 points, I can bring in 2 squads for 80 points, and that's going to be more effective at a lower price point. And let's take those at elite. Next up, supports. He has some Beryuzas in here. These Beryuzas are not upfetted, that's the first thing we're going to do. Tungushkas don't have to be upfetted, because I'd rather have 4, especially due to their long range SAM, than having more or less of them at a higher veterancy, because the veterancy or the accuracy on these is already very good. A Buck M1 long range AA platform carries 4 missiles, needs some micromanagement in the sense that you're going to be resupplying this thing rather quickly depending on the amount of aircraft that are going to be flying by. But what I found is that they will usually hit their target with a 65% accuracy and a 9 HE damage. And especially this 9 HE is important because it means they're going to quickly take out enemy aircraft. Couple these up with a Beryuza or Tungushka and they only have to hit them for 1 or 2 HP and the Buck will finish them off. Next up, a couple of Smirches. I'm not sure how much damage or how many points you're going to get out of these guys. In a low point tactical game, a 140 point unit is a huge investment. And while the Smirch is of course a very lethal weapon, I'm not sure I would take it in this situation. I would much rather have medium range or just the howitzers like the MSTAs, which are also very accurate. And then a couple of mortars. So I'm going to trade the Smirches out and get a couple of Nonas in. And let's go with 7 of those. And then finally the MSTAs or MSTA-S. Great howitzers. Good range, good dispersion, decent rate of fire. They are also pretty heavily armored for a howitzer. 5 frontal armor, 3 side, 2 back and 2 top. Of course they're a big size, they got bad optics, but they're only there to sit next to your fob and destroy enemies from afar. Keep in mind though that these things are pretty damn expensive at 130 points. So if you want something that's a bit cheaper, or if you want something that can do even more damage, you could go with a 2S7 Peon or a Malka. Because they got more range, lesser dispersion, and they can act as snipers. It depends on your preference. Moving on to tanks. A couple of cheap T-72As, and he has these at the highest veterancy. Nothing I would change here, as they are very good all-rounders. T-72B as an upgrade from that tank. And the tanks that he has in here are pretty much all around the 100 point price tag. 95, 90, 85, 110. That's not really a setup that I would use here. I know it's a low point tactical game, so getting a very expensive tank in is going to be a big investment. But in those low point tactical games you don't have that many units that you need to micro. So in that situation I think that these high-priced tanks can actually work better than they would do normally, because you have more time to keep them alive. So what I'm going to do is throw out all of these units, except for the T-72A and B versions. And I want to have units that are survivable and can do some damage. I'm going to make my pretty standard lineup by now. I'm going to bring in the BVI, or if you want an ATGM on those, go with the BV. But I prefer the BVI because it's a little bit cheaper in maintenance, and everything except for the ATGM and 1 point of armor penetration is the same. Let's bring in 4 of those guys. Then I want something in the range of 150-160. So let's go with the T-72 OBR 1989. Still 20 armor penetration. Actually, are they that much better? Yeah, they have a lot more armor. 3 frontal armor more and 2 side armor. Rate of fire is a little bit higher for the BVI. Armor penetration is the same, or actually +1 for the 1989. But they do carry the sphere, and this is a nice ATGM. But actually, I'm considering going with the T-80U because this thing can fire an ATGM on the move, and that is definitely something that's very, very handy. The question is which version of the T-80 we're going to go with. We already got a 120 point unit, let's go with 155 then. Take 2 of these, get a little bit more accuracy out of that main gun and the reflex. And then finally a heavy hitter in the form of the T-72BU. Taking 2 of these will top off the entire deck. We got cheap tanks, mediums, I suppose you could say another medium, high end and super heavies. And these super heavies, I would not recommend bringing these in at the start of the battle. Although I have seen people do it and be very, very effective with them. But I prefer not to bring them in right away, because you never know if someone has an ATGM plane on standby and is going to snipe your expensive unit in one go. Reconnaissance wise, he has 1 card of Spetsnaz GRUs. Again, in the Mi-24D, I would not do that. Unfortunately, you don't really get that many alternative helicopters. You get the Mi-24A. I was hoping we would get the Ka-29TB, but that's unfortunately only reserved for stuff like the Spetsnaz VMF. And the Spetsnaz GRU can also fulfill an offensive role, so these guys are more versatile than the Spetsnaz VMF. The question is how are we going to transport these, and it depends on the role. If you want to use these guys as a sort of support force for your base Spetsnaz, where they're going into towns with the Spetsnaz to clear them out, take them in the BTR-90, because the BTR-90 is a very, very good transport. Bit of frontal armor, grenade launcher, main autocannon, extremely high off-road speed of 100, very high autonomy of 800, and they're amphibious at 50 kph. If you want to use these as the more traditional reconnaissance teams or commandos, let's say I'm going to split that up. If you want to use more base reconnaissance teams, which are only going to tell you what they see and where the enemy is, don't use Spetsnaz GRU. Use base Spetsnaz because it's going to save you a couple of points, especially if you transport those in the Ka-29. This is a 65 point investment. This is an 85 point investment. I would use the Spetsnaz GRU in a more offensive role, and I don't think that that is what this deck needs, because we already got the VDVs, we got the Spetsnaz. You don't really need Spetsnaz GRU here. So instead I'm going to go with the Spetsnaz VMF and the Ka-29TB to make sure I still have a couple of reconnaissance units. Then a BRM-1K, exceptional reconnaissance unit. He has 4 of these. Looks good. A couple of UAZs as cheap reconnaissance units for 25 points. 0 armor but very good optics and medium stealth should keep these guys alive. And then a Ka-52, 3 of these, and yeah, you could upvote them if you wanted to, but I'm just going to keep them at their lower veterancy because I want to have 3 of these helicopters. They're extremely deadly. That is mostly the anti-radar units or anti-air units, because they carry those seed missiles and they can engage helicopters as well with the Igla-Vs. Vehicle-wise, pretty much the units that I was expecting here. A BMPT and a TO-62, so the BMPT for anti-infantry operations. And I am going to go with 7 of these, because a low point tactical game usually doesn't need that many units. And the same thing for the TO-62. I'm going to upvet these so that I have only 9 in this deck. Helicopter wise, Mi-24 VPs and Mi-28s. Since the AA compartment is good, we don't really need to have the Mi-24V in here. So having 4 of these at trained is a decent workhorse, although I'm going to delete it anyway. And the rationale behind that is that I want my Mi-24P as a sort of workhorse base version. This one is going to engage vehicles, it's going to engage infantry with its main gun and the rocket pods, and it can take down some medium tanks with 20 armor penetration using those Kokon missiles. If I'm engaging heavy tanks, I want to bring in the Mi-28. And because you do have access to a lot of stuff, I want to diversify this deck as much as possible. If I was to take the Mi-28 and the Mi-24 VP, you'd have 2 helicopters which are not that far apart price-wise, which can do pretty much the same thing. Although the Mi-24 VP is more geared towards anti-vehicle warfare, the Mi-28 is more of a tank killer with 16 of those attacker missiles. Air tab, 1 seaplane here, looks good to me. 2 MiG-29M cluster bombers. It really depends on what you want to do with these. Cluster bombers will be effective though. Su-27M, very high price point tank sniper. If you can get these guys to do their job right, it's going to be a very effective unit, and you can use them in a double role. They can unfortunately not do dogfighting, but they do carry a couple of long-range Vimpel missiles. If you just want a plane that is geared towards anti-tank warfare, go with the MiG-27K, because this thing is still pretty survivable, has a very high-end anti-tank weapon. Decent speed at 900, and you're going to pay 55 points less than the Su-27M. I think that this unit is not that well suited for this deck, in the sense that you don't really need to have a 200 point unit. You're going to be saving up for hours in order to get one of those. So I'm going to use one of these tank snipers, and probably going to have to fly that thing in along with the MiG-25 BM seaplane in order to make sure that there is no AA which can threaten either aircraft. And then finally the IL-102. It's still ugly as fuck. It looks like a tank with jet engines, but if you see one of these things coming, you better get in cover, because a carpet bomb is gonna, or at least a carpet bombing run, is gonna come down at you with 14 500 kilogram bombs. Except that I won't be using this one. The reason for that is that it's slow. It has low ECM of only 10%, and while it does deploy a very high amount of bombs, I can think of other units which can be more or less as effective without costing me 180 points. So I'm going to delete the IL-102, and I'm going to take the other MiG-29 plane. This is the MiG-29S. It carries 4 500 kilogram bombs, so 10 less than the IL-102. You're going to be paying only 135 points for it, and this thing can also do dogfighting. Now the reason I'm picking this plane is because if you have one of each, so you have one MiG-29M and one MiG-29S, you can actually build yourself a sort of air superiority duo. The MiG-29M has long-range Vimpels. The MiG-29S has short-range Vimpels, or short-range air-to-air missiles. This one is going to engage the enemy aircraft at long range. This one is going to close in and kill it off with short-range missiles. So that's why I have both. Also, the MiG-29S is a lot more survivable than the IL-102. It's a lot faster, 900 versus 750, has more ECM and a very much smaller turn radius. So with this, I think that these units are the best bombers for the job here. See about the Naval tab. He has a bit of everything here. A couple of Jangyus, and considering it is a deck for a low point tactical game, I'm going to upvet these Jangyus. I want to make sure I have 4 of them at hardened. 1 Sovremeni is a huge investment in a game like this, so I'm going to throw this one out. I want to keep these guys alive, and for that I will be needing a Muna to keep them supplied. I also don't think I'll be needing a 5 bow, especially only 2 of these is going to mean that for 300 points you can get 2 missiles per plane on target, so that's 4 missiles. If they hit, they do 80 armor penetration damage. But getting through the the NATO CWIS is going to be quite difficult with only 4 missiles, so these guys are out. He also has 2 balls in here to make sure that he can engage units which are getting too close to his naval zone. The problem is that these balls don't really have the range that they need. And by that I mean that the ball has 5600 meter range. The main gun range on a Congo, if that was the unit that's in front of your shores, has a range of 6 kilometers, so it can engage the ball before the ball can shoot it. Unfortunately, we don't get that many alternatives. You could go with Redoutes. Now, if these things hit a NATO ship, it's going to go down in 1 hit. They are pretty expensive at 60 points, but I think that deploying a couple of these is still going to be more effective than deploying a couple of balls. Although, again, I've rarely, if ever, used these units. Actually, let's just go with both. Why not? This way, if you have a NATO ship in front of your coast, you can always take it down. So, that's a few of the adjustments I would make to the USSR tactical deck. I don't play tactical that much anymore, but this is a deck that I would be using, and if you want to use it, the link or the code to import it is in the description down below. If you have a deck you want me to check out, send it in through the link in the description, and I'll be happy to look at it. Although keep in mind I am cutting down a little bit on Red Dragon vids, so I might not get around to doing your deck. Anyway, thanks for watching. I hope you had fun with this deck. Let me know if you have any adjustments you would make in the description or in the comments below. I look forward to hearing from you, and I look forward to seeing you. I look forward to seeing you in the next video.